I'm Usman Hikmat. I welcome you on behalf of the President and the Executive Committee of the chapter to the webinar conducted by CS Sri Lanka, chapter of Western Region KSA. For today's session, we have CA members joining us from Sri Lanka, UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, Botswana, India, Riyadh, and Daman KSA. We also have members of other accounting bodies and colleagues from other professional bodies participating. I thank you all on behalf of the chapter for accepting our invitation and joining with us today. CS Sri Lanka members, please ensure you type in your name and membership number in the chat box. Business valuation is an exercise, if properly undertaken, that will give an unbiased, credible assessment of the value of a business. Knowing what an asset or business is worth and what determines that value is a prerequisite for an intelligent decision making. In choosing investment for a portfolio, in deciding on the appropriate price to pay or receive in a takeover, and in making an investment, finance, dividend choices when running a business. There are many other circumstances in modern business why valuations are important. These include financial reporting, legal disputes, fundraising, intellectual property, and also when it comes to determining relative performance of a business. Today, we have invited an expert in this field to enlighten our members and the colleagues from our fraternity on this subject. Our panelist today is Usama Jifri, a corporate finance, capital markets, and investment banking professional. He possesses experience in financial advisory with a Big Four audit firm, currently a capital market analyst and an investment banking professional. He is a chartered financial analyst and also an associate member of CIMA. Usama is certified in advanced valuation from New York University. He is also serving as a lecturer in University of Colombo, Colombo Stock Exchange and Academy of Finance, coaching in the areas of risk management, financial strategy, financial analysis, strategic case study, and financial modeling. Without further ado, I would like to hand this over to Usama. Usama, over to you.
Thank you, Usman, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to the session. Pleasure to be here. So let's get into the presentation itself. So the agenda, we kept it a little very high level look at valuations. So I mean, we are not going to the nitty-gritties of the technicalities, etc. But the important outcome which you will receive out of this is, at any given situation, despite the valuation methodologies which are going to come across to you, the content here, the idea is to get the content to you so that you will come out as an expert and you will be able to understand and ask the right questions also when it comes to the valuations. So I'd like to start off with an overview of the methodologies themselves without delving into the detail. Of course, when it comes to the respective points, which is our second point, is what we will quickly look into as well. So what I'd like to bring to your attention first is valuations is not a science. It's more what I mean over there is, example, depending on our assumptions, depending on our expectations and how we perceive the respective asset of the company, the valuations are going to be slightly different. Right? More often than not, the direction is going to be the same. Maybe the magnitude or the extent of it, though, can have differences. Right? And so it's an important element to understand. It doesn't mean that two of us carrying out a valuation that we are going to arrive at a single price. Right, single value. That's not how it works. Valuation is like an art, depending on how you go about. And inevitably, when it comes to valuation or not, we are exposed to biases. Right? For example, if you're a financial advisor who is representing the buyer, inevitably you will have a bit of a bias towards looking for negotiating points to reduce the valuations. And vice versa, if you are representing the seller, you are going to look for negotiating points and etc., which is going to bias the valuations a little upwards. Right? So these biases and exact, it is subjective. Right? What we are trying to do though is arrive at an indicative value where our decision is not going to be changed, right? So if based on my experience and pretty much every valuation guru out there I know, is what they are going to tell you is it is a subjective science. If somebody is trying to tell you this is the true value of an asset, this is the exact value of an asset, it's actually nothing to do with the true value or exact value. Indicative value, yes. Representative value, yes. Exact value, true value, not actual. So when it comes to valuations also, you have these two extremes of analysts. You have the number crunchers and you have the storytellers. So you have the number crunchers, which at a point of time I was as well, who are like so into Excel and the numbers, like all they worry about is that huge Excel or the numbers quantitative element behind the valuation, which is not necessarily the case. If you're trying to sell an asset, if you're trying to purchase an asset, etc., the numbers may make sense to you, but if you don't have a narrative, for example, to the investment committee or to the buyer or the seller or whoever you're representing, right? And then you have the storytellers. They believe in this wonderful story across about the company or the asset, but they don't have the numbers to justify the story. Valuations and an analyst for valuation purposes needs to have a balance of this. He needs to recognize the narrative for the company because we are going to be large forward looking, which is one of the more representative ways of looking at evaluation. And we need the numbers to back that narrative as well. There needs to be a balance between this number crunching and the storytelling. Right? So us as analysts at any given role, we need to build this exercise as well, where we have this balance between the number crunchers and storytelling. So a couple of important elements on the basic elements in terms of valuations is the biases, the fact that it's a science and not an art, and of course the balance between the number crunching and the storytelling are going to be very important for you when it comes to your valuation. Right? Remembering these and focusing on these when it comes to your the technicalities, the calculations basically is going to reduce that subjectivity of your valuation to a great extent. Not entirely, you will not be able to eliminate it, but it's going to reduce the subjectivity to a great extent. What we can say in terms of reducing the subjectivity is the error between analysts who are less subjective in carrying out the valuation, that error is going to be very, very small, provided all of them focus on these respective elements. So an overview of the methodologies themselves, by and large, we will carry out an asset-based valuation, earnings-based valuations, and cash flow-based valuations. Right? These are the broad spectrum methodologies which we will apply across. These can, I mean, when it comes to private equity, when it comes to valuing intangibles, when it comes to valuing IPOs or startups for that matter, you come up with many other academic exercises also which branch into different areas in terms of different techniques of valuation, but all have the underpinning rationale and the fundamentals of exactly what we are talking about across over here as well. So on a broader spectrum on valuations and the different methodologies, these are the specific points of note. I'd like to take you through the finer points of the valuation methodologies as well, because they are going to have bearing of our discussion for the is understandably going to be the balance sheet. So the moment our attention goes across to the values which are in the balance sheet, particularly the assets, liabilities are sometimes most of the time represented as monetary values, for instance. But particularly the assets, for instance, we need to ask, what is the value they are carried at? Is it market value? Is it carrying value, amortized cost, realizable value, etc.? What is the value which is carried at? Most of the time, historical costs, less depreciation, etc. But is this actually representative of the value of the respective asset? Yes or no? Is historical cost more representative, or is fair value more representative? If fair value is more representative, we know the valuation which is carried on the balance sheet is actually biasing our value downwards. Or if we have recognized it at market value And if actually realizable value is more of a representative value, then we are biasing our valuation upwards. So focusing on each of those captions, because the balance sheet is going to be our main focus across in terms of the asset-based valuation, focusing on those captions are going to have very important elements. The factors with monetary value, it might be your borrowings, it might be the cash and bank balances, etc. Of course, they are largely representative of the we look at intangibles, then we look at problems of, okay, does the respective caption represent the value which we are talking about? And at least at a minimum, we need to focus on the material captions themselves in terms of whether they are representing a reasonable value. When it comes to the asset-based valuation, a perspective which we also look at is the liquidation perspective, right? Or if we jump a couple of lines, you will see the walkaway price. Now, when we look at the asset-based valuation, it's total assets minus your total liabilities, which give you the value of your equity. Now, this is the basic accounting equation as well, right? If we isolate the capital portion over there, it's asset minus liabilities, which you're left with. The picture though that it paints is that if I liquidate all my liabilities and I beg your pardon, if I liquidate all my assets and if I settle my liabilities, the value which remains, I'm going to accrue across to my equity holders. Liquidation perspective. So going concern, growth, future perspective, etc. are not exactly represented across over here. Right? So sometimes we consider this as our flow value, the walkaway price, where if anybody is going to, assuming that you're in the market for your company, if anybody offers you a value below this floor price, you virtually get up and walk away. That's why we call it the walkaway price. I mean, it's absurd that you would want to sell beyond that level. Right? So it kind of establishes a flow value when it comes to the pricing. So the going concern, profitabilities, etc., future aspect of it is not entirely reflected across here, which is why the flow value and the liquidation element comes into play. That was the finer points of the asset-based valuations, which brings us to the earnings-based valuations. Earnings, understandably, is represented in the income statement. And how we apply this earnings-based valuations, we use a market multiples-based methodology under relative valuations with the law of one price reflecting across over here. What do we mean by the law of one price? Assets with entirely similar characteristics should be priced similarly. So if my company A, has the exact same characteristic, risk return characteristics with company B, the exact same metric which is used to calculate the valuation for company B should technically be applicable for my company as well, which is where the multiples come into play. How much does the market value 1 unit of company B's earnings? How much does the market value 1 unit of the company's revenues? Price to earnings or price to sales, for example, can be relative multiples which we can use on my earnings to arrive at a value as well. The law of one price. But since, for example, price to earnings is probably the most commonly used multiple there, since we are talking about that net income, which is the last caption which appears across in the income statement there, before you to get to that income statement caption, you need to start with your revenue, your direct costs, your indirect costs, the interest cost as a result of the decision of your gearing, and your tax efficiencies. All of these elements are going to have an impact on your net income. Which means you need to focus on these specific captions as well as it applies to the net income. What are we looking at? Is the net income coming from the composition of the income? Is it from core business or non-core business? If it's non-core business, we need to ask the question, okay, is this going to continue to the future? Yes or no? Growth, what's going to be the growth perspective in terms of the future? How sustainable is the earnings that we are talking about? Is there any one-off, extraordinary or unusual items recognized in the respective captions there, right? Because, for instance, if there is an item which is one-off recognized as an expense in there, us using the net income as a metric for the multiple is going to be compromised because we are unfairly decreasing our net income value across over, which means our valuation is going to be biased downwards. We need to make adjustments therefore to the net income, and the resulting metric, the adjusted net income, for example, is what is applied across onto the relative valuations to arrive at the numbers. Considering the respective metric here is net income, we need to identify the components which affect the net income before we can go forward with the valuation itself. The finer points on a very high level without diving into the details of what the earnings-based valuation will need to focus on. Which brings us to the cash flow-based valuation. Now, probably one of the most accepted go-to methodologies which are constantly used due to the detail which goes into this. So here is where we are talking about the present value of future cash flows, the discounted cash flow valuation approach, and understandably the source is our cash flow statement. And it is looking at future value, forward looking. What is the cash flows which are going to accrue into the future? What is the present value of those cash flows? And we identify a value as at today, time zero. Now, forward looking, therefore the going concern is also reflected across in here as well, much more explicitly than, for example, the asset-based methodology. The bigger components when it comes to the cash flow based valuation is your inflows, your outflows, your initial investment in the form of capex, cost of capital, and of course risk. And each of these variables have understandable. If your inflows increase, your valuation will increase. If your outflows increase, your valuation will decrease. If your investment increases, it will have a negative impact across into your valuation. If your risk increases, your cost of capital is going to increase again, which is also going to have a negative implication to your valuation. The finer points as it applies to the cash flow based valuation. So that was a quick look at the methodologies and the finer points which they have in play. Why I wanted to take you through them is because we will constantly go across to the respective information so that we can apply it across the entire spectrum of what we are talking about, which is the startup techs, IPOs, and right up to the M&As. Right. Which brings us to the main points of our discussion today, which is the startup techs, M&As, and the IPO elements, right? So I'll take one step backwards before we get into the main discussion itself, which again focuses on the valuation. What are the fundamental drivers when it comes to the valuation aspects which we are talking about? So the main elements which we look at when it comes to the valuation is asset base, earnings, cash flow, growth, risk, maturity. These are the main elements which we are going to be talking about when it comes across to the valuations. And across the board, you will see how these respective drivers will have implications across to our analysis as well. And considering these valuations, considering the factors which we are looking at across over here as well, the information which we will be dealing with is, you will have current information, you will have historical information, and to a certain degree, you will also be dealing with forecast information across as well. Historical asset base, historical earning, whether it will be sustainable to the future, what has the historical growth rates been, how is it going to be to the future, etc. All these factors are going to be reflected across in these fundamental drivers. And if you do look at it, since these are the fundamental drivers of valuation, it has a direct implication to the exact methodologies we were talking about as well, right? Between our asset-based valuation, between our earnings-based valuation, and our cash flow-based valuation. All of these broader methodologies, the specific methodologies which we spoke about, which are the most recognized, all of these valuation methodologies are driven by these fundamental drivers themselves, right? which is why we pull these drivers out as the main elements as well. So some of the key focus points which I'd like to bring to your notice as at this point of time, which we will constantly go back to, is the finer points as it applied to the respective valuation methodologies. and the information which we will be dealing with, the past, the present, and the future in terms of the certainty which will prevail for us for that purpose, right? We will constantly go back to this information across. Which brings us to the main points of our discussion. Now we've got a refresher kind of in terms of the valuation methodologies and the finer points, which will most definitely help you to grasp what is going to be spoken about across over here. So we put the startup and tech companies together because if you see the new tech companies which are coming across, it's virtually startup companies as well, right? And the characteristics which we are going to be discussing is going to be fairly significantly overlapping with the respective companies as well. When we look at startup companies or the startup tech companies, for instance, what's the characteristic we are looking at in terms of its asset base? Generally low. Generally, asset base is going to be low. Right? They don't have a significant funding base to invest across in resources, in substantial resources. They start off very small. So the asset base is generally very low. The driver behind the company's valuation particularly is an idea. Is the intellect. It's the concept behind the company itself. Right? And next comes our earnings. When we look at understandably the startup and the newer tech companies, if we look at a history in terms of their earnings, it's going to be minimal or none at all even. This is the nature of the startups which we are talking about as well. What about the future? What is their earnings potential? What is the sustainability of that earnings potential? What is the growth which we can apply to the respective earnings potential? All are going to be question marks for us, right? Which is going to present complications to our valuation, because if you would have noticed by now, the exact way which we are dissecting this valuation, the exact way which we are dissecting the startup valuation is based on those fundamental principles of valuation, starting with the asset base and earnings. And we continue with the rest of the principles as well. When it comes to the cash flows for the respective type of companies, extremely tight, right? I mean, they are not going to be heavily profitable, significantly cash-based businesses. It's all getting reinvested back in the business, and it's going to be very tightly managed. Future in terms of cash flows, again, going to be highly uncertain unless they can get an investor on board, which is coming soon, the next stage of the valuations. Growth, exponentially high, provided it comes with a caveat, if the idea is worth it. Provided that the idea is worth it, the growth is going to be exponentially high. Funds for scalability is a question. We're talking about a startup, we're talking about a new growth tech company, for example. Even the likes of Facebook, etc., had difficulties at a point of time raising funds as well. Risk. Right? So risk would appear a bit more obvious across over here. If you do look at it, look at what you're talking about. Low, uncertain, question mark. Asset base is low. Future earnings is uncertain. Future cash flows are uncertain. Funds for scalability, question mark. So understandably, when we talk about the startups, we are talking about a relatively much higher risk because of the uncertainty attached to the respective type of companies. And if the risk is going to increase, what is also going to happen on the company's valuation, technically speaking, your cost of capital needs to increase because the risk will be reflected there, which is going to bring down the present value of your future cash flows. Challenges for the startup companies and their valuations. Maturity, it's some way off, right? They are at the very beginning of the life cycle, infancy stage, and there's quite some way before they hit maturity as well. And again, as a result of that, I mean, if you're talking about a company which is at its peak or a mature stage versus at its infancy, the certainty that the mature company versus the certainty as it will apply to the startup is very, very different. All going to have major implications across your valuations, because again, what we are talking about is asset base, earnings, cash flow, growth, risk, and maturity, which are the fundamental drivers across over here. What do we mean by fundamental drivers? If you try to put that into numbers, a substantial proportion of the respective asset or company's valuation will be reflected by these factors themselves. Right? which brings us to the methodologies and the challenges that it's going to pose across. Asset-based valuation, as we recognize, the asset base is low, right? But is this representative of the indicative value of the firm? Not exactly, right? I mean, for example, Facebook at a point of time was offered a 1 billion rupee value by Yahoo to be purchased. But at that point of time, Facebook said no, and they mentioned that their belief was the valuation was too big. Right? Point to note, we will come back to Facebook once again as we go along. So not exactly representative. The value isn't entirely representative across in the asset base itself. Earnings-based valuation. Future earnings are quite uncertain, isn't it? Extremely risky, in fact. Visibility and effect on the application of our earnings-based methodologies is going to be significant, right? Suitable proxies, you're a startup company. You take it from a Sri Lankan context, which is where I'm talking from right now. If you try to find proxies here, law of one price, relative valuation, market multiples, etc., the chance of finding a proxy for a company is very, very low due to the operations being so diverse. More developed markets, I mean, we've got like near 290 companies listed across in the Colombo Stock Exchange. But you take more developed markets, the diversity and the volume of listed entities are much larger, which makes the multiples a lot more easier as well. But relatively speaking, when it comes to the startups and the techs, trying to find a suitable proxy to represent our earnings metric, for example, is going to be very difficult. Cash flow based valuation. Probability of your cash flow being negative is very high. Why? Because a significant amount is going back in as reinvestment and you're trying to find money from every single point of time. And more often than not, the cash flows generated from operations is going to be a far cry from what is necessary to be invested across in your cash flows from investment. And the companies, given that they are at infancy stage, the probability of success is also going to be on a balance, which increases the risk as well. And the moment your risk increases, your discount factor increases, your present value of future cash flows is also going to come. But I mean, when we look at it on a basis, it looks like, hey, startups are not worthy of being invested in, but that's not the case, isn't it? So more often than not, you can even see a negative net present value for startups or the new tech companies which you are talking about, which doesn't mean that the company isn't valuable at all. Overcoming the challenges. Now, interestingly, if you are thinking about complicated, sophisticated processes which are going to overcome the challenges, that's not how valuations are about. Interesting. Valuations are subjective by nature. We've already established that, right? The biases, the roles which you will play, etc. It's just that the circumstances will dictate whether the subjectivity is high or low. When it comes to valuations also, more often than not, you can use about 40% of effort to get 40 to 50% of effort to get to about 90% plus of the valuation. Right? What I also mean there is the remaining 60% of the effort is what you get. What is the percentage which it explains? Only the remaining 10%. So valuations are not complicated. If you want like a 99% certainty in terms of the value, not that I'm saying you can get there, but if you want to do that, the amount of effort is going to be humongous. The magnitude is so huge that the cost benefit doesn't make sense. What makes sense is put that 40% of the effort in, try to identify the variables which have a greater explanatory power and get to that 85-90% value. Your decision is not going to change. If at all, you're going to make an increased return on it. So subjectivity is already there. How do we respond to this? Particularly, this is relevant for startups. Therefore, keep it simple. Keep things simple. Because see, end of the day, trying to forecast 5, 7, 9 years ahead is a huge challenge, right? You take, let's look at mid last year, 2019, July, for example, if you looked at it, who would have been able to predict where the pandemic is going to, or how the pandemic is going to affect companies, right? So it is anyway challenging. How do we keep this simple? For example, one of the techniques which is used for the valuation of startups, provided the idea comes in and it's accepted, it's going to take off pretty significantly, etc. So one of the ways which we do in terms of reducing the subjectivities, we kind of look at a period. Is it 3 years, 5 years, or 7 years, for example, that it will hit some level of maturity, which starts giving us a stable profits, cash flows, revenues, etc. Right? Which is that period. And then from today to that maturity period, look at even a linear growth model. No problem. Look at even a linear growth model and build that into your numbers and arrive at the narrative which will back the respective numbers as well. Keep it simple. As it will apply to startups and some other types of valuations also, leave emotion at the door. Now, you've been involved with the company for so long, and you know it's your baby. You started it from scratch. Emotion being represented across in value doesn't at all give you an indicative value of the company. If this emotion element gets in here, I mean, you don't have a ceiling or a control about where the valuations can go, because the owners will say, the founders will say, the creative directors will say, this is the value of the company, this is where I believe it is. That's not how it works. You can't sell that emotion to another person. It has to be left at the door. Put in the research and the qualitative efforts to back the numbers and the story. Particularly depending on who the investors you are presenting to, this will have a major implication across this. So keep things simple, build up through research and qualitative efforts, build up the backup, the justification for your narrative for the company. That will give you rise to how the numbers can make sense, which need to get represented across in the quantitative numbers, which will interpret across into the value. That way, your valuations, the emotional attachment to it, etc., all of these elements are getting responded to. If you are forecasting exponential growth for your idea, right, you believe in it so much. I mean, digitization now, disruptive innovation right now is putting technologies out there which is unbelievable. Right? So if you are forecasting exponential growth, particularly when it comes to the startup elements, make sure you account for the respective cost. Because sometimes you're accounting for massive growths, but you're not thinking about the costs in here. So essentially, you're biasing your valuation significantly upwards. But if you put in the scalability costs, the etc., which come in there, now better narrative of the story as well as representative of the numbers as well. If not, with the emotion, with the expected exponential growth, etc., you're going to see valuations which are sky high, which you will not be able to back up. So I'd like to, I mean, we wanted to put some perspective across through a bit of a case study as well. So what you're seeing here is across on is Facebook leading to its initial public offering. Right? So the company in October 2007, if I'm not mistaken, was valued at about 15 billion US dollars. Right now, see the 15 billion US dollars. If you move back to about the date, I can't exactly point out. Yahoo making but even Facebook told them no, because but by October 2007, the valuation was $15 billion. And by the time it went to its initial public offering, the value was $50 billion. Hopefully you're understanding my story about activities of valuations, the difficulties to forecast, much less $90 billion when Yahoo came off. I mean, if you can't see it internally itself, how would an external party try to go about the valuation? More info coming across over there, which brings us to the IPO elements themselves. So we've come through the startups and the techs. Now we are knocking on the door of the IPOs. And how do we go about the valuations? So if you look at the nature of the company itself at the IPO stage, what are we talking about? It has passed its startup phase, right? So there are some positives across here. They're gearing up for growth. This is what you would see the conventional pattern when it comes to the IPOs. They are trying to source funds, understandably, to fund the respective growth option itself. Therefore, some of the characteristics which you're going to see is when it comes to the companies, they are relatively younger companies. They are not startups themselves, but they are relatively younger companies. Since they haven't been listed in a recognized exchange, understandably, they are not going to have a trading history. So finding again counterparties or respective indicative values, etc., obviously is going to be difficult. The chances that a private placement has taken place can also be very high. It even happened with Facebook. There were private placements which took place, and private placements can have a bit of difficulties as well. Like, for instance, you might have a private placement going at, let's say, $5 per share, but when it comes to the IPO and the company goes at $10 per share, if the private placement guys start flooding the market with their stake, the company immediately after the IPO is going to see a bit of a negative impact on their share prices. So another consideration which needs to be taken into focus as well. Reasons for a listing. So we were talking about they want to invest in the respective growth of whether it's a technology entrance, etc. You're trying to fund the development. So you've done the research. Now you've got some level of feasibility across India, and now you're trying to fund the development for the purpose of realizing that growth. It could be in the form of acquisition of assets, again, obviously to facilitate their growth. It could be a situation where, okay, at the onset you had a venture capital fund which had invested in the business, and now they want out, etc. These can be some of the reasons for the initial public offerings when it comes to the respective companies. But again, if you do look at it, we are talking about growth, acquisition of assets, generating profits, generating cash flows. Again, these very reasons for why companies are going across into the IPOs and the impacts it's going to have to the fundamental value drivers leading to the respective valuation methodologies, it's the same destination which you are going to be arriving at. Right? So, excuse me, any type of valuation which you're looking at, end of the day, it is going to be driving those fundamental value drivers, leading to those methodologies and implications across over there, right? Which is why those finer points were also important. Which brings us to the challenges. The entity has not been listed in the past and therefore no indicative price information. That's a basic element. They are, of course, coming across to the IPO for that purpose. The asset base can be limited. Unlike a startup company, not that the asset base is very low, but it can be, relatively speaking, it's going to be very limited. The value proposition for the respective company, similar to the startups, can be very highly vested in the future. Most of the valuation is going to be vested in the future. For example, a 15 billion valuation on Facebook, and when it came to the IPO, it's a $90 billion valuation. It's massive. You're talking about what, 6-7 times its valuation, right? So at the $15 billion valuation, at that point of time, the certainty of seeing the $90 billion valuation wouldn't have been as much. Maybe to the founders, though, if not more, with their emotional attachment. You have to make an allowance for illiquidity and risk, right? Because at the end of the day, the company is not entirely known. The chances that the certainty in relation to growth, in relation to profitability, in relation to cash flows are going to be questionable. So whether you can enter and exit the positions and etc., can be considerations from an valuation perspective as well. Overcoming the challenges are in fact similar to that of a startup. Overcoming the challenges are similar to that of a startup, but not as concerning. Right? So you will have the uncertainty issue, you will have the risk issue, you will have the growth issues, etc. But the company has some operating history. So backing up your narrative, your story is going to be relatively much easier in comparison to a startup. You already have an existing asset base. Take Facebook, for example, again. They had built up their asset base, the stories, the technologies behind the companies by the time they definitely by the time they got across to the IPO. So again, the valuations, the quantitative, the number crunching and the storytelling was very likely, high likely to be backed up by the narrative again as well. They do have a performance history which supports the future narrative which I just mentioned, unlike, of course, the level of uncertainty that we will have with a startup company. The company will most probably have an established product or service offering. They will have established markets operating in, as well as customers as well, which again brings down that uncertainty, reduces the risk, increases to some level the predictability of the future, which makes the subjectivity in relation to the valuation a little less. Again, as it applies to the principles themselves, subjective by nature, keep it simple as it will apply to the IPO valuation as well, leave the emotion at the door. But as it particularly will affect the IPO valuation, it's easier to back the stories and numbers because you have a benchmark to go to in terms of the past performance and history as it will apply to the respective companies, which is an important element which reduces the tediousness and the challenges as it will apply to the IPO valuations. Which brings us back to Facebook again. So 15 billion valuation on October 2007, leading to an IPO of about $90 billion. Now comes the interesting part. So as of November 2020, Facebook's valuation was in the range of about $790 billion. And where did Facebook put themselves at initially? They said no to Yahoo's 1 billion because they valued themselves as 2 billion, which went to 15, which went to 90, and then massive growth up to the $790 billion as at this month, basically. And these activities were not organic growth. This was largely contributed by the M&A activity, which was undertaken by the company. So you've seen the startup and the tech company in the form of Facebook coming to life and moving across into its IPO. Now we look at the M&A activity and how it contributed to the valuation of the company. So mergers and acquisitions. Typical motivations behind the M&A activities which will be undertaken is to create value creation through either revenue synergies or cost synergies, profitabilities, diversification to reduce the risk factor, in pursuit of acquiring assets, increasing your financial capacity, growth, etc. And these are the typical motivations which you will see behind the mergers and acquisitions. But once again, as you can see, these very motivations are once again driving our valuation methodologies. This is the importance behind those finer points and the methodologies which you spoke about. All the motivations, all the challenges behind the respective types of companies is going to be affecting those valuation drivers and ultimately the methodologies which you're going to be using. You need to build in your detail, certain level of detail, into your calculations and the technicalities to respond to reducing these subjectivities. Right? So since the detail actually came across here, another point which I'd like to bring across is there is a popular belief in general that greater the complexity of your models, of the valuation methodologies, of the number of variables which are being taken into consideration, greater the certainty of your valuations. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. As I mentioned, you can put in about 40 to 50% effort to arrive at about 90% plus of the indicative value. The remaining 10%, for you to get that incremental 10% represented, the amount of effort in terms of research, backing it up, statistics, etc., it's going to be massive. 60% of effort, 50 to 60% of effort there is the explanatory power for that incremental 10%. So valuations are I mean, getting up to that 100% it doesn't make sense on a cost-benefit basis as well. So popular belief, it is a myth in fact, that greater the detail and complexity, better the valuation. Absolutely not. So since detail came across here, I wanted to bring that point out as well. So mergers and acquisitions, continuing on with the valuation here. So if you look at the life cycle, largely what you would see occurring in terms of the M&A activity taking place is understandably the growth, maturity, and the decline phases. Growth because you're trying to acquire assets or you're trying to integrate, so it will allow you to get the financial capacity. Maturity, you're trying to compete, you're trying to get into a bigger, penetrate the market further, etc. Decline, you're trying to extend the life cycle of the company, industry, etc. So most of the M&A activity you would see being undertaken in this growth, maturity, and the decline phases. Let's start answering our questions again. But when it comes to the M&A side of things, the asset base now, established company, right? Because it's not at the startup stage. Growth meaning we've jumped the 3-5 year stage, right? So relatively higher asset base and improving asset base as well. When we look at the earnings, again, we might be growth, either we are growing, maturity, it's probably sustainable and certain. Decline, we are having a few problems, but nothing significant, which is why we are trying to get into the M&A activity. Cash flows, improving if you're on the growth phase of it, because reinvestment is taking place, you may not have a significant amount of free cash flow. Positive, particularly when it comes to the maturity state, because no significant reinvestment, the amount of free cash flow which you have is going to be relatively much greater. Certainty of the respective earnings and even the cash flows are also going to be much more higher. Growth perspective, as you can see, is either high, you're at growth, or you're at a mature stage of growth when it comes to the respective companies as well. Risk, relatively talking, as you come through the startup stage, relatively, the risk is also lesser. Maturity, once again, considering we've jumped that 3 to 5 year stage, either we are at maturity or we are close to maturity, the proximity towards the mature element is a lot more beneficial to us in the M&A side of things. Now, just to back up the tenor when it came to the respective M&A activity, one of the biggest corporate actions which was probably undertaken was the Facebook acquisition of WhatsApp. And if you see, Facebook being established in 2004 and going to its IPO in 2012, WhatsApp incorporated in 2009 and eventually being taken over in 2014, you can see it's not at startup stages when all of these M&A activities actually being undertaken. Right? Which brings us to the valuation itself. Right? So Facebook paid $19 billion for the purpose of acquiring WhatsApp. But WhatsApp had only $22 million in revenues. That valuation was not entirely justified. Facebook comparatively had more users, and the technology which was used by WhatsApp was not necessarily superior either. So why pay $19 billion? The rationale. WhatsApp had the largest user base growth among social media platforms. Right? And imagine if Facebook and WhatsApp, which is what is happening, came together, that base with the growth rate, what they can do. Massive potential, right? Synergy. Over 500 million people use WhatsApp on a monthly basis, and the service added more than 1 million users per day. And 70% of WhatsApp users were daily active compared to Facebook 62%. And if you put the 8% there into millions of users, you're going to see a huge quantum of differentiation. Interaction between users. Continuous versus Facebook user interaction. WhatsApp users send, for example, 500 million pictures back and forth per day, about 150 million more than the Facebook users. Now, if you look at Facebook, sometimes you might go and like something, you might share something, and you're done. But when it came to WhatsApp, the level of interaction was huge. I mean, you might be having conversations for days on end. This interaction was also an important element. The potential opportunities to synergize and monetize together, successfully keeping tech rivals out of competitors' hands. WhatsApp was considered as a major rival, up and coming rival to Facebook, and as a result of the acquisition, this too created a barrier in terms of the competition as massive. And if you look at the monthly active users here, right? Facebook from 2.2 billion, WhatsApp 1.5, Messenger 1.3 billion, Instagram another 1 billion. But if you look at the situation now, that top four, Facebook, WhatsApp, Messenger, and Instagram, are all under the same umbrella of Facebook. And imagine what that can mean for growth, interactions, synergizing, monetizing, profitabilities, cash flows, asset-based technology, etc. All again the main value drivers which we keep talking about. So the challenges when it comes to the M&A elements and the valuation perspective per se is probability of realizing these synergies, since the value of the M&As are largely driven by the synergies themselves. The probability and the impact on risks will be factors. How are you going to quantify the interaction between the users? How are you going to put into perspective the substantial growth of the user base on a daily basis, etc.? These are going to be the challenges. Emotion, the motive and drive of the human factor biasing valuations as well. There's a huge sentimental factor, even from an investor's perspective, which can drive valuations sky high. Post-merger complications. This is one of the main factors, in addition to maybe another one or two factors. One of the main factors which contribute to M&A activity failing is not considering these post-merger implications. The cultural issues, the differences in competences, the decision-making problems, all can have implications to drive the values down, which are going to be the challenges when it comes to the M&A activity, in addition to the forecasting element. Now, trying to bring these number of users, interacting between each other, etc., for the purpose of forecasting the future. I mean, forecasting for the future without this number of dynamism in the variables is already pretty challenging, right? So, overcoming the challenges. Account for controls to achieve synergies through the costs. What are the controls that you're putting in place? Is it people? Is it resources? Is it expertise? What are you putting in place to make sure that you're going to increase the probability of realizing this synergy? Account for those costs. In the absence of them, the chances of you actually achieving your synergies are going to be questionable. Independent valuations. Understandably, this emotional attachment can largely be addressed to a great extent through this independent valuation. Post-merger complications, you need to recognize the costs of controls which you are putting in place as well. Cultural wise, decision making wise, etc., access to resources wise, etc., integration wise, you need to take into consideration, what am I going to do? Is there a specific department? Is there a set of specialists who are going to bring into place in terms of bringing this? These elements are going to help us to reduce the subjectivity behind our valuation. Due diligence and feasibility for a more comprehensive, cohesive outlook in terms of what's going to happen. The due diligence, for example, from a commercial, legal, financial perspective, will give us a good understanding in terms of the strategic fit of the respective companies undertaking the merger and acquisition activities. Again, the greater the fit, the lesser the subjective behind what you're trying to realize between the motivations of the valuation. The outcome is a less subjective, more realistic valuation with a lower amount of negative surprises. So all of these activities, if you look at it, if you come back to that science factor of the valuations, the fact that it is a art and not a science, not the synergies which you will see and which I will see will be different. The interactions about how I will account for it based on my research and how you will account for it based on your research is going to be different. It is an art versus a science. And the methodologies, the asset-based, the earnings-based, and the cash flow-based methodologies, and the finer points behind them, how the respective motivations behind the tech startups, the IPO, and the M&A factors, how those motivations will affect these finer points, and particularly the valuation fundamentals, the asset, the growth, the earnings, the cash flows, maturity, etc. These are the very elements which are going to change, which we need to put in control elements in place, which reduce the subjectivity of them being achieved, which will give us more realistic valuations. Right, so which brings us to the end of our discussion. I hope I have not gone overboard on the time. We can look at the Q&A now. Okay. Usman, I hope I haven't taken too much time. I can carry on.
No, this is perfect. Usama, thank you. It's very insightful, and the examples you showed on Facebook and WhatsApp was very interesting, especially the part where you showed that the valuation at 19 billion of WhatsApp at that point in time is not justified, but still a company like Facebook took the decision to go ahead with that, considering the growth potential is, I mean, it's a very good lesson also for the people who feel to see. I mean, you just don't look at the numbers and look at the growth potential and other qualitative factors. And when I'm thinking about it, something else popped up in my mind. I may not be that relevant, but especially in tech startups and tech businesses, human capital is extremely important. It's just the ideas and the minds. It's not the asset and the machines and big buildings and brick and mortar. It's all about the mind. So it is extremely important to see the human capital there. So how these businesses, incorporate that into their valuation. So how tech mergers and acquisitions happen, whether do they consider that part in the valuation?
So interesting question, Usman. So again, if we try to answer it based on what we discussed itself, if you go to your asset-based valuation, that human capital element is not reflected in the balance sheet.
Yeah.
Is why you need to think about other alternatives. We can look at earnings and cash flow-based methodologies where they may be reflected. How can they be reflected? For example, take the likes of PickMe or Uber or even Facebook, for instance. It's that ideas which need to get converted across into the earnings and the cash flows. And if you understandably look at the growth behind the respective companies, it is that idea generation. Let's say going into PickMe Foods versus PickMe Flash versus Uber, whatever it is, these ideas are going to get converted to greater revenues, to greater profitabilities, to greater cash flows. Now you're seeing that human capital element being reflected across in the earnings and the cash flows, which make the earnings-based valuations and the cash flow-based valuations a lot more representative versus the asset-based valuation where the respective factor is not recognized.
Yeah, that's very clear. Now there are some other questions from our participants. We'll take a few until the time permits. There is one question from Faisal where he says, when we use different methods of valuation, each method will give different values. Which value we should choose for the company, and why should we choose that particular value?
So Faisal, to answer the question again, first point, art and not a science.
Yeah.
Right? So how it works when it comes to startups, to IPOs or M&A activity is you are going to be negotiating your position, right? Whether you're trying to raise finance from a venture capitalist, whether you're trying to go to market with your idea, or whether you're trying to merge or acquire with another company, etc. There's a significant amount of negotiation which is going to work there. How it works in the practical world is you are trying to arrive at a range. As I mentioned, when it comes to asset-based valuation, it's the walk-away price. Right? If anybody offers you anything below that, you literally want to get up and walk away. Right? Whereas generally the discounted cash flow methodology, going concern, risk, growth potentials are much more explicitly represented there. So you will see DCF or discounted cash flow methodology representing the higher end of that range there. Understandably, as the owners, you would like to go towards that higher end, and particularly if the uh, certainty, the predictability of your narrative, your story, and your strategy, if the predictability is relatively higher, the chances that your negotiation powers will lead you towards the upper range is going to be very high. The earnings based one also will be relatively below, above average. But if anybody is trying to negotiate with you closer towards your asset based valuation, where you probably don't want to initiate chats with them as well. So you're using the respective factors to justify your narrative and numbers to that higher end of the spectrum. You may not get the exact ceiling value which you're putting across, because obviously your emotion and the biases etc. will have pushed that value higher, but it will be in that range which you are talking about as
well. Okay, so and Niranga Pereira is asking continuation of Faisal's question, and he seems to think that free cash flow is the most appropriate basis for valuation. And he says, however, when it comes to private equities, it's very challenging to get reliable information. Some private companies have issues in even their financial statements and closing this financial books on time. So he's saying, I'm facing a practical issue at the moment in determining fair value of our equity investment in one of the private companies. We carried it at cost, but for sure earnings and earning potential is very high. So could you please share your view on private equities and how do you value them?
So Niranga, again, interesting practical situation to be involved with, which we have had the similar issues as well. So number one, as if you're talking like hardcore private equities, understandably your cost of capital as a result of risk is going to be very high, which need to be represented across as well. But to I think your bigger problem is in terms of the numbers and how you're trying to identify it, because the numbers are not publicly available. So you can have a bottoms up or a top down approach as well, right? So what you can do is you can do a bit of industry analysis with the listed guys, etc., and try and do a quick benchmark, which it will be a bit subjective, of course, but it will reduce your subjectivity here. Do a bit of a benchmark to try and on a larger basis where you can identify, okay, what sort of asset bases, what sort of earnings potentials, etc., is existing in the respective company, and how they are being converted across into cash flows. Their investments are going to be like. Then what you do is you look at the industry as a whole. Go to the industry reports, carry out an analysis of the industry, and try and look, okay, what is the industry offering into the future? How strong is the company right now? Are they in a position to capitalize on most of those growth opportunities, or are they going to be stable, or are there companies, or is the competition bigger that they will not be able to capitalize on the opportunities? You can convert these across into, albeit subjective, but revenues, earnings, and cash flows. And it will give you a much better indication of the company's valuation and numbers as well. So that's a top-down approach which you can apply across.
I hope that answered Niranga's question. And there's one from Fazmir, and he's asking startups and VCs value based on revenue multiples in practice, and under which methodology will this come? It's more theoretical. So I hope.
Fazmir, on the revenue multiples, they are looking at the earnings-based multiple also comes under the broader classification of market multiples-based methodology, the law of one price. So essentially, you're looking at the same thing, but since you asked the questions on venture capital, there are other venture capital methods of valuations which will come in, which involve the pre-money valuation, post-money valuations, etc., which are important considerations which need to be taken into consideration. The issue with the revenue multiple, though, just if you look at the earnings-based, what we discussed, the revenue multiple does not take into consideration any of the direct costs, indirect costs, the gearing, the interest as a result of the gearing of the company, or the tax efficiencies, which can have major implications to your decisions.
So we took few questions on valuation. We'll take one on IPO. And Shanta is asking, what are the key risks that management must worry about most when going for IPOs? How do we set the right milestone to go for an IPO?
So Shant, on the IPOs, I think the timing is going to be very critical for you. Because if you look at most of the companies on the IPO spectrum, they are looking for that growth perspective, not even maturity. That's why they are raising the funds as well. So the timing is going to be very important. A particular scenario which comes to mind is Access Engineering, right? Which is listed in the Colombo Stock Exchange. Post IPO, the next 2 years, year on year, they nearly went 100% and 100%. Superb jump in terms of the investors and etc. Right? That gives a lot of confidence as well. Okay, these guys are realizing the stories they are talking about as well. So that's an important point, is going to be the timing in terms of, I saw that, I think you are asking about a milestone or the key points as well. Again, IPOs, if you look at the motivations behind them, the motivations can take different forms, either growth, or you're paying off debt, or you're trying to access a resource, or you're looking at M&A activity. Right? You need to identify which element these are. If they are looking at growth, what are the probabilities of realizing the synergies or the growth options? If you're looking at M&A activities, it's a little relatively a lot more certain in comparison to realizing the synergies. If you're looking to pay off the debt in the future, how is it as a result of the debt coming down? The implication to the near future is going to be your profitabilities are going to be increasing. Your balance sheet is going to become more strong. So in the immediate term, profitability still improve. In the medium to longer term, you have a stronger balance sheet to capitalize on new opportunities which come your way. So these stories, the narrative again, the narrative needs to be understood. Okay, so what we do is we put ourselves in the shoes of the company and we ask, okay, what are these guys going to do with the money? And we identify how that will, story and strategy is going to get converted to the numbers. Another good example here, at a point of time, HEMA sold its PLC, right? So they had a rights issue, they had divested their power business, etc. And they had 10 billion rupees in cash, which was purely held. And they held it for the longest time. You know, like we as analysts were breaking our head in terms of strategies and synergies and M&A and growth and market developments, etc. But they held it for like nearly a year, 10 billion rupees in cash. Right? So what we would look at is, okay, what is the objective behind the IPO? What are they going to use the monies for? And we need to convert that strategy, the story, we need to convert it across into the numbers. Is the debt going to come down? Immediate future, you're going to see profitability is improve. Medium to long term future, you're going to be able to capitalize on opportunities, depending on, of course, the competition, etc. You will have to do your industry analysis, etc. But it gives you a good idea how you can convert the strategy into the numbers and ultimately the valuation as well.
Okay, I hope that answered the question. And there's a question from a government's perspective. I mean, we all are retail investors. Most of the people invest a small amount of money maybe in the stock market, though we theoretically learn, and when we work for companies, we look into the big picture. But as a retail investor, methods like PE will not be that relevant for a tech startup. So if you are a retail investor, what are the other valuations you will be looking at?
Well, tech startups, again, what we will probably be looking at is we will look at a longer term future in terms of trying to identify where does the stability comes into play. We will look at whether the story makes sense as well. Right? From a retail investor's perspective, what I would advise is try and invest in industries which you like, which you have certain competencies. Let's say, for example, you're from the apparel sector or you're from the construction sector, etc. You know the variables which will drive the respective sectors and the industries, right? And then when you look at companies, their operations are going to start making a lot more sense to you as well, rather than looking at the high risk startup factors. For the high risk startup factors, the amount of industry analysis that you need to carry out, the feasibilities in terms of getting the technology off the ground, etc., these will involve a lot of specific work which are running across. Those are the factors that you will focus on, which will help you to identify, okay, what is the probability of the strategy's product or service being a success, and then whether you want to put your money in there or not.
Okay. There is another question from Jayant. Non-availability of long-term capital market rates will impact the valuation. Further market rates, especially interest rate drop, also could impact the valuation. So how we can overcome this issue?
So Jayant, again, another interesting question. Now, you take certain markets, you take the US, UK, for example, the valuations in terms of the variables which you mentioned are a lot more reliable to go on. Take a market like Sri Lanka, for example. So we have the technical analysis which is driving the value, you have the fundamental analysis which is driving the value, and you have the sentimental factor which is driving the values as well. So sometimes we might be doing DCFs and market multiples, forever, but about 50-60% sometimes of the market movement is actually coming from the sentimental factor. So you have to look at the market and you have to identify which are the variables from a broader perspective, technical, fundamental, or sentimental, which is driving it. If you look at the most recent past, even there's a lot of sentimental drive behind the 2 months of the activities coming in. If at all after the budget we should have seen the market go, it didn't go. So that, we need to be able to identify these elements. If you want to talk about the specific variables, growth, cost of capital, interest rates, risk-free rate, beta factors even, etc. If you want to talk about those factors specifically, what we do from a valuation perspective is we look at a range. We do the sensitivity table, for example, cost of capital versus growth, and we try and identify by what range is the value change. If, for example, the valuation range which you are getting from our sensitivity analysis is about 10 rupees to a share versus 90 rupees to a share, there's too much risk there. We wouldn't want to expose ourselves too much there. But likewise, if the range is giving us something along the lines of about, let's say, 40 to 50 rupees on the share, now you know that level of risk is a lot lesser. So a sensitivity or a scenario analysis will really help you across in that exercise.
Okay. There's one question from Afam, and it is very relevant to the present context, and he's asking now, during a pandemic or a recession, what we are facing right now, companies are losing value by 20-25%. And the value was initially established based on the asset base and earning potential and so on. And the foundation on which these companies were built is still the same. So why this value drop is happening?
So a couple of assumptions from time 0 right across to, let's say, generally we forecast about 5 to 7 years, time 7, right? Nothing is going to remain constant. You can look at all the variables, interest rates, risk-free rate, beta factor, cost of capitals, inflows, outflows, etc. None of these are going to remain same. Ideally, you need to be rolling on your valuations because the predictability on a pandemic, for example, is impossible, right? So these elements are unpredictable by nature, and of course it's going to have implications. But the implications, the moment it comes together, the implications that it's going to have, you can of course see, and you're going to see those implications on cash flows, profitability, growth, etc. For example, you wanted to value the hospitality sector right now, technically a zero revenue situation, bad investment, right? But look at what happened with Expo Lanka in the more recent past. They managed to secure some PP freight forwardings across, massive growth. Right? Now, if you were able to foresee that factor from 140 rupees in March 2020, it touched about 28 rupees in October maybe. If you were able to forecast those elements, if your research, foresight, analysis would have forecast to that extent, you would have been the winner. And also to respond to the question as well, you have to look at we are only talking equities right now, right? You cannot only look at it from an equities perspective. You need to look at it from a portfolio perspective. If you see the risk increasing in equities, you need to be able to rebalance, reconstitute into other alternative investment sources, as well, whether it's real estate. For example, real estate is not doing bad right now. In fact, it's a good hedge against pandemics or whatever it might be. Rental income, while you hold on to the asset, you will be having a rental income whilst capital appreciation, etc. comes together. So for that question, you need to go one level up and look at it from an overall portfolio basis as well, and try and rebalance, reconstitute to manage your risk and return positions as well.
I hope that answered Afam's question. And there's another question: how to value a blog site? I think it is again a question on tech startup. A blog with 6 digits of social media subscribers or of followers and 7 digits monthly engagement. What base we could use? So
Yes,
if you
that is very technical, but let me try and put that forward. So essentially, what you're looking at is, if you are looking at a startup, again, you need to be looking at the specific value drivers of the company. How many subscribers? What is the level of interaction? What is the level of churn you're looking at? What is the level of cross-selling you might be looking at? How are all these going to get converted to revenues, profitabilities, cash flows? Then your valuation methodologies are going to start looking a lot more robust as a result of it.
Again, there's a question from Roshan. In Sri Lankan context, what is the most commonly used valuation method? Is that valuation method actually reflects the particular company's value?
Again, as we mentioned, valuation is not an exact number itself. So what you're looking at is things can change, right? For instance, it's not only carrying out the valuation. You need, for example, carry out an exercise where you are looking at, okay, which company's share price is explained more by which valuation method. There may be certain companies where investors will tend to price these companies more based on their earnings potential. There may be certain companies where investors may choose to price them more on their dividend potential. There may be companies the investors will price them more based on their asset-based potential. For example, Chevron Lanka Lubricants, Nestle's, the likewise, right? Huge payouts in terms of dividends because held by foreign holdings. There, you might even want to go to a dividend discount. You might, if it were us, if it were me, I'd carry out the 3 valuation methodologies, look historically how the prices have moved against the valuation methodologies, and identify which one has a relatively great explanation power. And sometimes when it is not there, I will go back to the market and see, was there a major sentimental factor driving the market? Then I would use that as a discount, and you will start seeing relationships which will explain which methodologies are better than the other ones.
And there's one more question from Roshan. How realistic considering the current average market price, the real value worth of a share of an entity? I think he means that how do you know the price, current market price of any particular company share is realistic? And you can take CAC as an example and explain. That is the question, yeah.
So we use some basic metrics, which sometimes we can get criticized for as well, Roshan, right? So the basic metrics, for instance, let's say a share is trading at 10 rupees per share, but suddenly over 1 month, the share moves up to 20 rupees. So the basic questions which we ask is, did the asset base double? Did the earnings potential double? Did the cash flow potential double? If not, where is the value coming from? If there isn't a fundamental explaining that exponential jump, then probably it's the sentiment which is driving it. Right? So we use basic filters to actually identify them. And there have been instances in the past where we say, no, on a fundamental basis, we are going to cap it at 15 rupees per share. But share is going 16, 17, 18, 20, 22. Investors are asking, you guys are saying 15. But see, how are you going to reflect the fundamental factor? You need to have an entirely separate unit for behavioral analysis. And then you can reflect the fundamental factor across it. So use some basic metrics. Again, as I mentioned, financial analysis, valuations, etc. It's not rocket science. It's understanding the basic. It's like the 80-20 rule, for example. I used 80-40, for example. 40% of the variables have about 80%, 90% explanatory power over the valuations of the company. And put the basic filters. Okay, price double. Is there a reason for it? Is the industry expanding enough for with a limited set of competitors for them to take advantage of the opportunity? Is their earnings potential going to increase as a result of that? Ask these basic questions. You will be able to understand whether it's actually reflective of the movement or not.
Thank you very much, Osama. Those are the questions from our participants, and thank you very much for taking all the questions and giving us your time. It was a very useful session. Hopefully, in future, I think we can have a couple more sessions to enlighten our members. Now, I would like to call one of our members, Afam Nazimdeen, to give the closing remarks. Afam, over to you.
Good evening, everyone. Honorable Speaker, distinguished guests, and respected chapter members. It is my privilege to have been asked to propose the vote of thanks on today's webinar. As we progress our second year in KSA as the CA Sri Lankan chapter, each session has indeed been a stepping stone in achieving our chapter's mission. We thank you all again for supporting us achieve this successful event. First and foremost, I would like to thank our speaker, Mr. Osama Jifree. This was truly a remarkable session, and I'm sure all of us here have reached a finer view on valuations and what lies beneath all those numbers. Like you said, valuation is not science, it's an art. Thank you again for finding time to accommodate us in your busy schedules. Secondly, we express our heartfelt gratitude to our guests, fellow professionals, for accepting our invitation and showing your keenness to benefit from this session. Special thanks to our friends from Saudi Arabia, Sri Lanka, UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, Botswana, India, and Australia for being with us here today. Our thanks extend to our chapter members for actively supporting us in making this event a success. Finally, an event like this cannot happen overnight. The wheels have started turning weeks ago. We have been very fortunate enough to be backed by a team of motivated individuals, their immense support and efforts in making this event successful. Thank you, Mr. Fatih, our president, Mr. Wajira, our vice president, and other committee members. Until we see you again in another session, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.